Happy Saturday. It's October 5th, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
Well, Michael, it's been another dramatic week in the news. In the Middle East, the Iranian missile attack against Israel has further destabilized the political order in the region. In the U.S., a hotly anticipated vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance was not exactly the showdown that many had expected. But as usual, Michael, airmail is the antidote to all of that news.
Exactly. And we've, the presidential election is 30 days away, which means it is crunch time for the candidates. And we have a special guest who knows all about crunch time and campaigns, the political strategist James Carville. He's the subject of a new documentary called Carville, Winning is Everything, Stupid. And he'll join to share his insights on the race, American politics, and of course, much more. Then, speaking of politics, there's no place where politics are more mixed up at times, perhaps, than Italy. For the past year or so, Giorgia Meloni has been the country's right-wing prime minister, has been embroiled in scandals and seen her power ebbing. So what has she done? Well, she turned to her family and promoted her sister to a position of power. Mattia Ferraresi will join us from Italy with the story. And finally, it's often been said that the British and Americans are two cultures separated by a common language, but as Joel Golby reports from London, they're also separated by morning television shows. He'll tell us why America's morning TV shows are so damn boring, while their counterparts in the UK, Ashley, where you live, are so, well, as he says, downright bizarre that you can't help but be delighted. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Michael, I think we need some quality time with Carville. I mean, he is a political strategist of legend. He has been at the forefront of democratic politics for decades. And now he is the subject of a fascinating documentary called Carville, Winning is Everything, Stupid, directed by Matt Tiernauer. And it is already streaming on CNN. Welcome, James Carville.
We hooked up, so let's go.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining us. This is such a surreal experience to be interviewing you because Michael and I have just watched this fabulous new documentary about you and your life. And it's like seeing it all writ large, seeing you on the other side of the screen. So you usually, for the past however many decades now, you have been commenting on the story, interpreting politics, been such an important voice in that. And now you are in many ways the story with this incredible new film about you. First of all, how did it come together? Give us sort of the backstory.
A friend of mine, named Susan McHugh, said that she was a student at Rutgers in the 90s and she saw the war room and she got inspired to be in politics and she became the youngest chief of staff in history, female chief of staff, at 30 years old for Senator Harry Reid. And she said that she was so inspired by the war room that she wanted to make another film about me, to inspire another generation. And I said, well, it sounds flattering. I didn't think the thing was going to really go anywhere. And next thing I know, we're out raising money. And she is calling around, but doesn't know not much about the filmmaking industry. So she got the name of Matt Tiernauer. And she said, well, I'm going to call him. And she said, Matt, I'm trying to put together a documentary on James Carville. Do you have any ideas for some names you could suggest for being a director? And Matt says, yeah, me, I want to do that movie. So that's how it kind of came about.
James, one of the things I love about the film is, for those of us who are of a certain age, we remember the campaign of 92, your work on that. And as you note, I think very poignantly in the film, you didn't win your first political campaign as a consultant until you were 40, 41 years old and, came to it in the middle of your career. And then that sort of put you on the path to working with Clinton. So I'm just going to jump right into it for where we are now in the campaign. Your gut in 92, we've all seen the War Room, which was sort of, again, you referenced in the beginning, but where was your gut in 92 at 30 days out from the campaign as we are right now? Did you feel you were going to win this in 92, or was it you were still just sort of like hoping?
I was scared. And when you're in something like this, I tell people this day, every day you're thinking about who's going to win. You're not thinking about how you can win. And, toward the end of the campaign, I kind of knew that we were going to win. It was pretty clear that the night before the election when we had the final War Room meeting, but it was kind of cradle Catholic, and our disposition is not to be too optimistic about anything. I knew what winning would mean, and I tried to not allow myself to think about it and go there.
Did you know you were going to win because you saw good polling that confirmed it a little bit for you?
Sure, it had something to do with it, absolutely. A campaign, it has a feel. When you're around a losing campaign, I have, so is everybody else, it takes on certain characteristics. And it did not have that. And this is something I'll jump to a question. I know that people always ask me, who's going to win this election? And the truth of the matter is that I don't think about it very much, but it doesn't feel like Harris has got a losing campaign to me. It just doesn't have that stitch of a campaign that's going to lose.
Did you feel that in 2016 with Clinton's campaign?
I think I thought he was going to win, but he didn't. The campaign, it wasn't full of energy. I was obviously massively disappointed and somewhat surprised, but by the end of that campaign, you kind of knew Trump was coming out in some of these northern tier swing states. And I don't know, I wasn't involved in it, but I was unhappy election night, to say the least.
James, you've been active politically for decades, and you've been one of the most consistently engaged members of the Democratic Party who's been sort of at the forefront of the conversation. How do you rate the engagement of Americans politically at this moment in time compared to other periods of political history that you've seen?
Let's point out that the 2020 election had enormously high turnout. I mean, maybe the biggest jump in turnout we've seen in a long time. Let's see what happens this time. I think it was like 158 million people voted in 2020. I've asked people, and they're pretty reluctant, but my guess is we're a pretty high turnout, And so if that's the measure of engagement, we had a lot of engagement in 2020. And there's different levels of engagement, but I think people are getting pretty engaged out there.
This has been an election cycle of such whiplash, right? We had Biden, now we have Harris. How do you think the Democratic Party has handled this particular transition?
Well, I mean, I think it was very difficult. I think Democrats really wanted a choice other than Biden. But it's been so many weird things that happened this election. There's so many firsts that have happened here. I just got a feeling that something else big is going to happen between now and election day. I'm not sure what it is, but so many big things have happened. And it's just probably something else is we do for something else. But I wish I could tell you what it is. But something out of the ordinary.
Come on, James, you know what it is. I mean, you're the man who knows everything. I'm kidding, but...
If you ask Bill Belichick, probably knows more football than anybody. I don't think he knows any more than you do who's going to win the Super Bowl. And people think I know things. They'll come up to the airport. Now, tell me we're going to be okay. And I want to say, I can't tell you that. I'd like our chances, but I just don't have any... By the way, very few people do it. So one of the things that's happened in America is the rise of the prediction industry. There are people who just make a living and a good one off of predicting elections. They didn't have that before. They think about this 14 hours a day. So I just let them think about it. Now I'll pay attention a little bit to what they say, but that's not what I do. I view myself first and foremost an election effector, not an election predictor.
To continue your Bill Belichick analogy, a strong defense is a good offense, obviously. Is there one thing that you think the Harris campaign should be doing that they're not doing?
I think the Harris campaign has shown themselves to be a very confident, big event campaign. So the vice presidential rollout, I think, was well done. The convention, got to say, that was a well put on convention. The debate, they obviously were well prepared. It was a success. What I'm hoping to see more and more, that they're a good day-to-day campaign, that they're seizing opportunities, that they are controlling the news cycle, that they're getting the microphone in Trump's mouth, that they're making them respond. And I think I'd have to give them an incomplete on that. Nationally, I think they need to be more aggressive, and they have several big openings that I'd like to see them take.
What do you think the Harris campaign has done especially well, James? What would you say the great strength of that campaign is?
Clearly the debate. Clearly the convention. I didn't know this. And I'm stunned that I'm not the only one. 2 days ago, I'm reading the New York Times about Harris, who was on Stephanie Rule's show. And, she was on there, but she didn't say anything. It's platitudes, it's bromide, anytime that you ever want to criticize anybody's politics, you just accuse them of a lack of specificity. We really need to know the detail. And then in the story, unbeknownst to me, she has released an 81-page economic plan, of which, and I follow politics, I talk to people every day. I didn't know she had that. Tell me about, really? If I thought this out. The Times was kind of a throwaway line. In 92, I think we had an 85-page economic plan, of which I don't think anybody ever read a word, including me. But it's there. obviously you got to fill 81 pages up with some specificity. I'm going on a cross-country flight back to Los Angeles to New York, and I'm going to look up an economic plan to see what's in there. And I'm sure a lot of it is filler stuff, but still, it's 81 pages.
One of the things from the film is you came up from the South, big family, rural, semi-rural, and you know, when you hooked up with Clinton, you guys were both from the South, had sort of come from definitely middle class. And I'm just wondering, like, when you talk about, like, you've got your call, the people you're calling who are from the campaign, but every good political strategist they've got their finger in the wind with the average person. Are there few people who are not paid political people that you sort of like, if they're telling me this, that's a good sign or a bad sign? The average person out there that you might check in with.
Brothers and sisters, I talk to them a lot. They're not particularly Democrats. And one of the things, and the movie kind of forced me to think about this a little bit. And, you know, one of the stories is I was a late life guy. I didn't win my first campaign until I was 42. I was 48 when Clinton was elected. But what the movie has made appreciate, I lived a real life. I grew up, you know, people talk about marginalized people. Where I grew up, it was if there were 1,000 people, 400 had leprosy and 550 were impoverished Black people, and maybe 50 whites. That forms an experience. You know, I went to a large state university. I flunked out. Okay, fine. I went in the Marine Corps, so I had some experience with what the military is. I went to law school. Was not the greatest law school student in the world, but I absorbed. You know, I passed the bar. So I had a framework of what law was. I worked offshore. I was an hourly employee. I was a school teacher. I worked in a bank. I actually worked in a mayor's office in Baton Rouge, so I had some experience of what government was like or what kind of things that people did. I didn't realize it, but as I was accumulating that kind of experience, it really made me a much better political operative. Without that kind of accumulated experience, I hang around with, grew up with more Black people than probably any white political consultant in the country. And I'd lived in so many different places. But by that time, I had seen a lot and had a lot of experiences. I was seasoned by 1992. The stuff I've learned since then is just like, look how stupid I was way back when I was the young man of 48.
Well, James, it's an incredible film, and it's just a delight to get to spend that much time with you. And it's been amazing to talk to you here today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm glad y'all enjoyed the film. It was a great interview. And, you know, my fondest hope is that people see it and become inspired by politics, because it's really essential to how we do as a country, how we do around the world. So I appreciate you watching. I appreciate the fact you liked it, and I appreciate the fact you had me on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Let's move over to Italian politics, you know, almost as dysfunctional as our own here in the U.S.
Yeah, this is a story I'm eager to get into. It's by a writer over in Italy, Mattia Ferraresi, and it's about Giorgia Meloni, who's been the prime minister for a couple of years now and finds herself embroiled in her own kind of like mess of a little bit of her own making.
Indeed. But, you know, Michael, in such trying times, what do? Call in the family members. Mattia's here to talk all about the arrival of Ariana Meloni, the older sister of Giorgia Meloni, who has been brought in to clean up some of her messes. And boy, what messes they are. Mattia Ferraresi is the managing editor at the Italian newspaper Domani. Welcome, Mattia. So for those of us who do not read Corriere della Sera every day, what is the latest in Giorgia Meloni's embattled government?
Giorgia Meloni is going through a rocky time. The cabinet is sort of like crumbling a little bit here and there. The last one was the Minister of Culture. There was like among a sort of sexual, political, romantic scandal all wrapped together, has been forced to resign. But more in general, I think government is proved to be a little bit inconclusive and stuck without being able to do much. And so people are nervous around the prime minister this time.
The government's been plagued by a series of sex scandals. What exactly is going on there?
Oh, there was an interesting story about a minister of culture. It was like a former journalist that actually is still doing journalism because he's back at his previous job. He was in a relationship with a person surrounding him, although he's married, and was he acknowledged that that became a romantic relationship, but that it was more complicated than that because this person allegedly was trying to get some, like a position in the ministry and being recognized as an advisor, and probably she recorded stuff, and actually her Instagram profile is sort of witness to that she recorded and collected probably material that she wasn't supposed to, because she was actually only a friend, or so the minister would say, without any particular or specific or formal role. And so in this very rather weird and dramatic interview in prime time, the minister basically was almost crying. He had to admit that there was a romantic relationship there that got tangled in a sort of very complicated web of information that was apparently stolen, to the point that the minister sued this person afterwards with a series of like accusations that are pretty strong, like assault, and he claimed to be assaulted by her, and even like his privacy was sort of broken. And last but not least, he accused her of stealing his wedding ring, of all things.
I mean, this sounds like it's straight out of a soap opera, but the plot even thickens because Giorgia Meloni has enlisted, of all people, her sister to sort of help her fix some of these scandals. So whereas Giorgia has courted the spotlight and the headlines, her sister is a much more behind-the-scenes character. So tell us about her.
Right. Arianna has always been the sort of like the behind-the-scenes person. She's the older sister, like avoided the spotlight throughout her life, although she's very political. She started like doing politics, being involved in politics when she was 17. So she has the reputation of being the brainy one and puppeteer, the sort of queen maker of everything that her sister did. And so her role is well known in political circles. But the new thing is that she's sort of like stepping up, and she started to being increasingly present and to talk publicly. And now, for the first time in the last year, she has a role in the party. The party is called Brothers of Italy, and now everybody's joke is more like Sisters of Italy, of course. And Arianna is sort of stepping up to defend her sister, which I think it signals that the inner circle people in the Meloni's world are kind of nervous. And so they are sort of resorting back to that tribal instinct. And for people who doesn't know, the whole story of post-fascist movement in Italy has been marked by a clear and a distinct idea of like being very family-oriented and being like in a very closed circle where blood ties are pretty relevant. And so we can see that I don't think it's a good sign for the government that you need to go back and to bring up the only people that you can trust, that typically are people like within your family.
You have a very good piece of reporting in here where you talk about an official in Brothers of Italy said, in some ways the big sister being called in to help the little sister, they're sort of reenacting this scenario, this drama of their childhood. Tell us a little bit about how they were raised and how that's being layered into how people perceive what's going on here.
They were brought up by essentially a single mother from a disadvantaged background, you can say. They were like rather in lower middle class, I would say. And the father left the house basically when they are very young. Giorgia Meloni was 4 and her sister slightly older. She's a few years older than her. And at some point when Giorgia Meloni was 11, they decided, clearly they didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. So the whole situation there is a life in which there is big ideals, big political commitments since they were very, very, very young. And at the same time, this process of like sort of taking up their lives happens through refusing the father and being away from him and actively sort of liberating themselves from the father figure. You can say it's pretty much of a story like against patriarchy in a way.
Yeah, and kind of this us against the world mentality, right? When things get hard, we retreat to each other and we sort of like shut everyone else off, right?
If you put them together, if you put in the mix the fact that these were the 80s and 90s, they were like starting their commitment with a a pretty far-right party that added to the idea of like, we are the underdog, we're not part of the mainstream mentality, we are the minority. They, for sure, I think, developed like a sort of minority complex in that sense. And it's interesting the fact that now, coincidentally, both sisters, they dumped their longtime boyfriend. So they are progressively getting rid of the sort of male figures and other figures in their life they were attached to.
Were the Maloney sisters, like, when they were coming of age in politics, were they sort of referred to as a fearsome twosome? Or, you know, who was more famous first? How did their paths kind of converge as they were coming up in the world?
Georgia was always the extrovert, always. Ariana, the older sister, was the rebel in the family. So the one with like big ideas, not very diplomatic. Whereas Georgia was the one who was able to talk her way through everything, and was debating constantly. Ariana was always behind the scenes. So Ariana, as a matter of fact, she was known only to, you know, people in the chattering class, let's say, and like among journalists and people like really following closely politics until like probably a year ago. And even during the government, at the beginning of the Maloney government, Ariana was sort of like really in the shadow, and she was not an household name. Maybe people would know that Georgia had a sister, but that was about it. They didn't know much about her role in the government, so or in politics in general. So it's pretty recent, you know, it's a bigger phenomenon, the fact that they are like they go together. And now it's more obvious and open.
How do you see this situation unfurling for the Maloney sisters? I mean, you know, they've obviously come under quite a bit of criticism recently, but do you think they'll get through this moment?
I do think this government has a huge problem of credibility. I think it's more a problem of incompetence and inability to have like a meaningful and a significant ruling class, and having people that then can deal with stuff and can like do stuff. So I think the government is consuming itself out of its inability to do something. So I think it's stuck in their own inability to perform, to deliver.
Well, one to watch. Mattia, thank you so much for this great story and for explaining this all to us. What a fascinating world of Italian politics.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's just a nice reminder that family is everything.
Yeah, and I can only think, if this were happening in the UK, how the UK morning shows would cover a story like this versus the American morning shows. And that probably leads us into our next guest, Joel Golby.
I'm so happy to have Joel here to talk about this and to commiserate with, because the UK morning shows, if you haven't watched them, it's a completely different type of entertainment. And Joel's here to explain exactly why. He is a writer for The Guardian as well as Vice. And this is his first story for Airmail. Welcome, Joel.
Hello.
So Joel, when we first started talking about the UK morning shows, I was plagued by confusion. You know, they're so different from what we have in the US, whereas the Today Show and Good Morning America are so polished, you know, and the characters are almost like caricatures of morning television hosts. And then we've got this delightful situation in the UK. I've lived there for 2 years and I still can't make sense of it, but you can. So as a lifelong watcher of these programs, take us through them. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, yeah, I think British morning TV is sort of divided into three categories. You have early actual news programming, sort of before real people actually wake up. That's like your 6 a.m., 7 a.m. slot. And that's just people reading news headlines off any website they can find them, telling you a little bit of extra information. But it starts to get juicy, and I think crucially it starts to look like everything's about to fall apart at like 8 o'clock until about 10:30, because that's when it becomes a little bit more bombastic, a little bit more making the plane in flight and getting some of the weirdest guests you've ever seen in your life on to very briefly talk about a hot topic that someone invented, presumably when they were sitting on the toilet. And then after that, it sort of goes a bit more magazine-y. This Morning is the great shining star of daytime TV for me. It's like 3 hours of people nattering to one another. And then it segues into Loose Women, which I think is closer to what American viewers would understand, because it's a sort of British rip-off of The View, but just worse in every possible way.
Joel, it's so funny to me that these British morning shows tend to court controversy. Like in the US, we might have a sort of heated discussion, but it's never about anything especially high stakes, because this is supposed to be, a delightful cup of warm coffee, right? It's not supposed to be too polarizing on either side, because the goal is appeal to the masses. But in the UK, not so much. Like, we want argument. Explain it to us.
Yeah, why do we want an argument, though? It's a good point. It is interesting how these arguments, they do, I mean, listen, they're lively and they make it better to watch, but they're the exact right size of argument that they disappear after like 20 hours of discourse exactly. And that's when they go away forever. So there's sort of a fairly direct feed from an argument that will happen on Good Morning Britain, for example, at about 9:25. And then that will go on the Daily Express website at about 10:15. And then Twitter might start to pick it up, or it might even bleed into the later shows on ITV and the BBC. The argument we had 2 hours ago, we're making it bigger, we're talking about it now. And then, realistically, by the afternoon, people have already got off the idea. And by the evening, it's as if it never happened. But yeah, sort of low-level combat conversation is definitely a big driver in what makes British daytime TV compelling enough to not turn over and watch something that's actually good.
I love you've got a line in your story this week. You say, by noon, somehow British television diehards know less about the world than when they woke up. I'm just curious, like, all that seems to be missing sometimes is a page 3 girl on these shows. Are they kind of like a TV version of the old British tabloids, where they're just sort of like creating a bunch of junk?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they do hit slightly different, and I would argue slightly softer notes than our great old tabloid newspapers. But I do definitely see how they're a shadow of one another. That's a great question. Are they creating junk? I mean, yes, it's pablum. As I said in the article, I think it's very rare that British daytime TV has a particularly engaged audience. Like, now I'm an adult, I mainly watch it on days when I'm actively ill and unwell. It's perfect for that. If you have the kind of cold that has affected your brain in a way where you can't even really send a text message to your friends, you're so incapable. And what you kind of need is very bright studio lights and someone almost having an argument in front of an audience. So yeah, in that way, very much so. And also, if you ever flick through a tabloid newspaper, which I do once every 5 weeks when I go for a haircut, and I have to wait, and that's when I read a tabloid. But there's little tiny half stories at 80 to 100 words. They tell you some little news story, news nugget that you would have missed, but it sort of whips you up. It just gives you the exact right information that you can half repeat it as if you know about something at the pub later, or you can throw it into your own conversation or argument that you might be having with people that you're trying to win. And I think that's why it's very good at providing. It gives people just enough information that they can get a little bit annoyed about it, and they can sort of shape a bit of a worldview out of clay based on something that an actress who used to be in a soap but left it 20 years ago sort of said at 10:30 in the morning.
You also have this line that just killed me in your story about how, imagine what it's like to get, trolled on Twitter for things you don't even remember saying, right? Especially on Loose Women, there's so many of these people, right? 24 or something. They're all just kind of shouting out random things. Are people getting canceled because of stuff that they've said on morning television? Tell me a little bit about the reaction to these things, or does it just kind of pass over in the ether,
It's interesting, actually, because if you'd asked me this question maybe 3 months ago, I would have gone, yeah, no, nothing really matters. Nothing really happens on morning TV because no one is really around to watch it enough to cause a storm about it. It really does sort of wash over you like a wave. And as I think I said in the article, you could watch an hour of Loose Women and then not really recall what any of it was about. But cancellation does happen, and it actually happened in the week that I first started working on this story. There was a particularly one-sided setup where a Labour MP was brought onto morning TV and sort of asked to atone for opinions and crimes within the Labour Party, sort of out of nowhere. And the whole thing was very stilted. There was a lot of talking over people and a decibel of shouting too much. And I think what I learned from that particular controversy and the way that people reacted, there's a viral tweet I think about where it's an observation that goes, if you know someone's peed in a swimming pool, you won't go in it, but you know that people have peed in the sea. And that means that there is a certain level of pee that people are happy to be diluted in. And I feel daytime TV is a bit like that. People found a level of pee that, you know, culturally we weren't happy with watching. And that's when things got heated, and that's when people actually started to react, and it became a bit of a cultural snowball. And actually daytime TV is best when it's just under that line, and it can just roll along and be its own little mess without people who didn't watch it sort of butting down and trying to have an opinion about it.
So, Joel, I think the message here is for Americans, you don't even need to go on holiday anymore. You just need to come to the UK, get a hotel room in Manchester, and just watch these shows. It's going to do everything for your soul that you need.
Yeah. I mean, weirdly, that's one of the things I do when I go to America, like every time. I've never been to America and not watched a little bit of Kelly Ripa. And it's different and it's better, but I really feel like I'm in America when I'm watching it. I love that show. It's great. So yeah, it goes both ways.
Joel, thank you so much, not only for this great story, but for this wonderful interview. We love you and we need more of you in our lives. So let's do another one soon.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed it.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Michael, it is the weekend. I know that the weekend is not exactly something to trudge through, but surely you've got some recommendations to get our culture savvy even savvier.
I do. And this is a show that came out a couple years ago. It didn't get a lot of attention, and then Netflix put it up and got a lot of attention over the summer. A lot of people have been talking about it. I finally checked it out. It's called Your Honor, and it is on, I said, Netflix. It stars Bryan Cranston as a judge whose son commits a hit and run, and working with his son, he tries to cover it up. It's got a fantastic cast. You got Hope Davis, who's always terrific, and Michael Stolberg. It's pretty compelling. It's a great legal drama, and it's great, to see Cranston back on screen, trying to wrestle with some moral dilemmas. I thought it was terrific and terrifically entertaining. I'm going to stay with it. As I said, a lot of people discovered it this summer. You can't go wrong with Bryan Cranston. So it's called Your Honor, and it is streaming now on Netflix. And you, my dear, what do you have?
I'm reading a really wonderful book right now. It's called The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden. She's a Dutch novelist. This is her debut novel. And it came out in May, and it was recently shortlisted for the Booker. It's a love story. It's set in Amsterdam in 1961, and the protagonist is a woman named Isabella who's living a life of what one might have called quiet desperation. And she meets an intriguing love interest, and it unfolds from there. It's really beautifully written. It takes us back to an interesting period. I haven't read many novels set in Amsterdam in the 60s. It's fun to read from that perspective, but it's just a real pleasure. She's a wordsmith and does incredible things with the language here. It's just a delight to sort of exist in this world for a while. And again, very romantic and some hot sex scenes for those of you who are looking for that. So it's called The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden, and it's out now. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a marvelous weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davison, and music supervisor is Randall Poster. The theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thanks again for joining us.